brushing lightly against his stomach. The loss of his hand had been the price of life. Each day he awoke surprised it was no longer there. Each day he endured a pain for which there was no cure. It was his burden, and he would carry it forever, like his guilt. He lay back and stared at the painted ceiling. Plump, cheerful nymphs hunted deer and antelope across lush grassland as the goddess Diana looked on approvingly. Fabia sighed and settled half across him, her body supple and soft against his angular hardness. He was 3 weeks from his 26th birthday, and it had been almost 2 years since he returned from a Britain bled dry by Rome's vengeance to be acclaimed Hero of Rome. The Corona Aurea placed upon his brow by Emperor Nero himself. The honour had brought him fame, which he neither wanted nor deserved, and Nero's favour, which time had taught him was a fickle thing and not to be relied upon. At first, the young emperor had delighted in having a man close to his own age, a champion of war close by his side. Valerius must attend court each day at the gilded palace on the Palatine Hill to decorate Nero's assemblies and delight him with his tales of battle and comradeship and sacrifice. Of course he was flattered. What soldier, even a soldier as damaged as he, would not be? Great men, consuls and generals, bowed to him amongst the marbled pillars and painted statues. Beautiful women sought him out and ushered him to shadowy corners where they whispered of unlikely possibilities and even more unlikely certainties. And all the time he felt the emperor's hard little overbright eyes following his every move and growing ever hotter. He wasn't a fool. He had heard the stories. In the Legion he had lived with men, good men and bad, and knew that every man's taste did not follow natural lines, and that some men knew no boundaries at all. As a boy he had known love, or something he had believed was love, but what was acceptable between boys did not have to be right between men. Before the offer was made, he let it be known that it would be refused. To avoid the storm which would inevitably follow, he had spent a year living in Greece, hoping to be forgotten. The self-imposed exile gave him the opportunity to resume his philosophical studies under the great Apollonius, who had halted his wanderings for a time in Athens. But when he returned, his name was still on some courtier's list. He continued to be invited to the Palatine. He was watched, but now the watching was different, dangerous. Previously, when he had praised the tactics of Britain's governor, his audience had cried out in agreement. Now his listeners turned away with shakes of the head, muttering words like despot and butcher. Paulinus had gone too far, they said. He had despoiled the province when he should have revitalized it. Paulinus was to be recalled. Now, when men stood at his shoulder, he understood they were not listening, but memorizing and recording for the time when... A slim finger trailed through the cooling sweat that had pooled in the hollow of his chest. "We should bathe." Valerius dashed the melancholy from his head and smiled at her as she uncoiled herself from his body and led the way to the little bathhouse. When they had enjoyed the mixed pleasures of the caudarium and tepidarium, Fabia wrapped herself in a sheet and ushered him to a polished stone table, where she oiled his body with practised hands, easing each muscle of his shoulders, back and legs, then turning him over to do the same to chest and stomach. As her strong fingers fluttered over him, he felt the hot blood of desire rising again. Before he could act on it, she dropped the sheet and swung herself up to settle over him in a single movement. The intensity of her heat made him gasp. "I suppose this means you'll cost me more," he grumbled, attempting to think of anything but what was happening below his waist. "Oh, no, Valerius." Fabia's voice was the texture of raw silk drawn across rough wood. "This is my gift to myself. Stay just the way you are." Much later she saw him to the door and raised her lips to allow a decorous farewell kiss. Fabia Faustina, high-class courtesan, friend of the Empress Poppaea Augusta Sabina, and probably the most powerful woman in Rome. Strange that she should love him when she knew he could never return it. "And what do the courts promise today? Are you defence or prosecution, or both?" she asked lightly. "Neither." Valerius allowed himself a sad smile. "I must be with the